and ready to answer questions. The New York State Democratic primary, where the voters decide which one of the Democrats will go on to the general election, is coming up on June 26. We hope the information you hear today will help you decide who to choose as the best candidate to represent you in the general election in November, and of course in Washington for the next 4 years. My name is Diane Minitelli, and I will be the moderator for today's proceedings. Joining me on stage are Democratic candidates Tedra Cobb, Emily Martz, Patrick Nelson, Dylan Ratigan, and Katie Wilson. Lynn Kahn is the Green Party candidate. Don Boyajian withdrew from the race earlier this week. An invitation was extended to the Republican incumbent, Elise Stefanik, but she stated she was unable to attend. And I want to also remind you to please silence your cell phones if you haven't already. Thank you. The questions for today's forum were developed by members of the Adirondack Voters for Change, Unite the North Country, and students from the Participation in Government class at Saranac Lake High School. This afternoon's forum will proceed as follows. The candidates will each have 1 minute for an opening statement. Then they will be asked an in-depth question and have 2 minutes to respond. Then, after all the candidates have spoken, they will have a 1 minute for rebuttal. A second question will be asked with the same scenario. After the 2 in-depth questions, we will have a lightning round of questions. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to respond. They will each have 30 seconds for a closing statement as well. The order the candidates speak in was determined by a roll of the dice, which you just saw. So let's get started with the opening statements. And we just rolled the dice to see who would go first, and that would be Dylan Ratigan. You have 1 minute, and when you see the yellow card from our timers right there, you'll have 15 seconds left to speak.
Beautiful. Thank you. Hi, my name is Dylan Ratigan, and my decision to offer myself as an option to represent our district in this year's congressional election is the culmination of a 10-year career in political and economic reform that began after the financial crisis in 2008. At that time, I was intimately involved with the financial industry and had intimate knowledge of how they orchestrated the bailouts, and I saw directly the consequences of those policies and the costs that it was creating for ordinary Americans here in upstate New York. I resigned my position at the time in order to directly drive my attention at the sitting members of our government. In that time, it became very clear to me, both in 3 years at MSNBC and in writing a book, that our government is entirely beholden to their donors and makes policies at the direct expense of the people of this country. That's something that I've been working to reform for the past decade, and as such, I offer myself as your representative today.
Thank you very much. Katie, it's your turn. Yes. Keep talking.
I'm running for Congress right now because there are so many people across this district whose voices are not being taken into account in the legislative process. I'm from the North Country, my parents are from the North Country, and it hasn't always been easy to be from the North Country. But that doesn't make me not want to, it doesn't make me ungrateful. And I'm here because we have an opportunity right now. We're in a very unique moment where more people than ever are paying attention. More people are excited to participate in this process. And I'm here to give those people a voice, because there's a socioeconomic class of people who are not part of the conversation. And that is exactly what has to change if we want policies in this country that are representative of the people they're affecting. And so I'm here to ask for your vote. I'm here because I am exactly the kind of candidate that Elise Stefanik is terrified of, and exactly the kind of candidate she's never had to run against before. And I'm here to ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Tedra, you're next.
Thank you for being here today. I'm Tedra Cobb, and I'm running for Congress, where I've made my home. I've built my life here, I've raised my children here, and I've built my business. For the last 30 years, I've worked to improve access to healthcare and education, and to promote good business and honest and responsible government. here we are. Now more than ever, we need representatives who are listening to us and who are working for us. Right now, Congress is doing more harm than it is good. I'm assuming you, like I, wake up every morning and wondering, what will you read in the morning? Today, I'm sure we're going to be talking about that. I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to learning about the issues that are so important to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Lynn.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Lynn Kahn. I'm the Green Party candidate for Congress in New York District 21. I want to thank the organizers of this event for including a third-party candidate, because usually our voices are not heard. I was born in the Bronx. My parents and my mother's two sisters and my father's brother all grew up in the same orphanage, one of New York City's orphan asylums. So I get poverty, hard to start with less than the child of two orphans. I get poverty, I get being poor and not knowing you're poor, I get not understanding at all how the world works, and being driven, I believe, my whole life to figure out how people work, how institutions work, how do we change government, how do we build peace, how do we stop war. My degree is in clinical psychology. I worked as an organizational psychologist inside government for 32 years. So I'm going to focus on how do we drive solutions to complex problems.
Thank you very much. Emily.
I'm Emily Martz. Thank you very much for putting this together, and thank you all for coming, because this is a race about our core American principles. We the people to create justice for all. Everyone should have a chance to realize their full potential and purpose. And hard work, it should be rewarded. And this race is also about creating family-sustaining jobs in our region. And that is my track record, that is my experience. And here are just a few examples. Birch Boys in Tupper Lake, he is barely able to keep up with business. Apex Solar, solar panel distributors in Queensbury. With others, I helped them go from 30 jobs 5 years ago to 130 today, including some in Malone. And Champlain Valley farmers, they are now, thanks to a program I helped administer, exporting to New York City and Saratoga Springs. I love public service, and I want to serve this region to help bring us the resources that we deserve, that we will well use. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Patrick.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Nelson, and I'm running for the United States House of Representatives because we have some tremendously important decisions that we have to make in the coming decades. We must get off fossil fuels as quickly as humanly possible and rise to the challenge of climate change. We must guarantee health care to all Americans as a right, and we must transition our economy away from one of rabid individualism and screw you, I got mine economics to something that works for everyone. And I believe that we are going to make the right decisions because, as Winston Churchill once famously quipped, you can always trust the American people to do the right thing once they've exhausted all other options. And based on what we see in Washington, D.C., we are rapidly exhausting all other options. So I am so excited for the work that we get to do. We are going to transform our energy system with the largest public works project in the history of this country. We are going to pass Medicare for all, and we are going to transition our economy. And a big reason why I believe that we're going to do that is seeing all of your faces here today, participating in the political process. Thank you for being here, and I welcome the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, for your opening statements. Now we're going to have the two in-depth questions. We'll start with the first question. You'll have 2 minutes to respond, and then you'll have another minute after everybody has responded to make any other comments that you would like. So our first question is, Americans throughout our country, and the 21st District in particular, are in fear of not having or losing their health care. What is your roadmap for securing affordable health care for everyone in the 21st District? You have 2 minutes to respond and 15 seconds left to speak when you see the yellow card, and we are going to start with Patrick.
So I'm going to push back on the question a little bit, because I don't believe the goal should be, in the way you say, affordable health care, because that still presumes that health care should be a product that you purchase with your own money rather than a right that you have as a citizen. I believe we need to move to a full Medicare for all system by which every American has health care as a right of their citizenship, No more applying for new health care plans every year. No more worrying about qualifying based upon your income level to see what's going to happen, that you get caught in a benefits cliff. So I support two pieces of legislation that we need to take the best parts of both of them. That's H.R. 676, that's Keith Ellison's Medicare for All bill in the House. That's S. 1804, that is the Sanders, Gillibrand, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris bill that is in the Senate. The things we need to borrow from both of those bills. The transition part from S. 1804, which is a 4-year transition period, that we lower the Medicare eligibility by 10 years every year for 4 years, and we create an immediate public option on the exchange. So that at the end of that 4-year transition, which I personally think maybe needed to be extended to 6 years or to 8 years, you have 85 to 90% of the country already involved in the Medicare system, and we only have to worry about rolling over the remaining 10%. From H.R. 676, the thing that we need to borrow, two things, including long-term care in the Medicare for All package to ensure that when folks go into a nursing home or need home health aides, that is provided for them. We also need to borrow the just transition for healthcare workers from the House bill that provides a generous severance package to anyone who loses their job in the transition and ensures that those that are currently working in healthcare administration have the best opportunity to be getting the jobs in the Medicare for All system. We're going to sell this to people because it is fiscally responsible healthcare. We're spending twice as much per capita on our healthcare and are no healthier for it. We are already fourth highest in the country, or fourth highest in the world in taxpayer spending on healthcare. It's time for Congress to be responsible with our taxpayer healthcare dollar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Dylan?
So I can think of no better example of how broken our political system is than our healthcare system. I was working at MSNBC when President Obama introduced healthcare as an idea for discussion and reform. The Democrats had a majority in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and they had massive public support to do much of everything that Patrick just described. And yet the Democratic Party, with the complete control that they had, refused to even introduce the public option and instead put forth a piece of legislation that mandated that everybody in this country purchase health insurance from an unreformed private health insurance monopoly that ties your health care to your job. It was a bigger bailout for the financial system than the bailout of the banks. Max Baucus in the Senate had the opportunity to introduce the public option. And yet our political system is so desperately broken that even the well-meaning, aspiring, morally righteous Democratic Party, instead of doing anything like the obvious solutions that will be discussed up and down this table today, we're beholden to the health insurance companies and the drug companies that finance them. And unless we reform our political system first and foremost by not only how we vote in addressing the gerrymandering that leaves incumbents intact 90% of the time, which gives them the assurance that even as they abuse us and create incredibly expensive healthcare systems, or you can go down the list, refuse to negotiate on drug prices, trap people in jobs where their healthcare is attached to their work so they can't shift in our economy, until we actually reform our political system to hold our politicians accountable for the fact that they are beholden to health insurance and drug companies, not to individual human beings, there will be nothing that happens in healthcare, and there's no better example than the failure of Barack Obama just a few years ago.
Thank you, Dylan. Katie?
So the topic of healthcare is something that we have been arguing about and warring over in this country for quite some time. And it is one of those very divisive, polarizing issues that continues to keep our country in a place where we have two sides kind of sparring at each other, arguing about what's best for everybody with very different opinions on how to actually help people. And right now, it is the job of our representatives to compromise. We saw that with Obamacare. It certainly wasn't perfect, but it was what they could accomplish at the time. So right now, given where we are, there is an incredible bill that's been proposed by Chris Murphy, Senator Chris Murphy. It is a Medicare buy-in on the open exchange. And we need to be realistic about what we can get done now, because there are people dying in the streets. There are people who cannot afford their prescription drugs who are being forced to sell their homes. There are people suffering right now in very real ways. Look at Lyme disease up here and how little of that gets covered by insurance. So what we can do with the Chris Murphy plan is allow anyone to buy into Medicare, anyone. But they don't have to. The private insurance companies still get to exist as they are, which means they're not fighting for their lives and they're not going to push back as hard as they will against any other plan proposed. Anyone can buy into Medicare, which covers more people, begins to drive prices down. You combine that with the option to negotiate for prescription drug costs, and suddenly we have a very good bridge from where we are to where we want to be. This is a self-promoting system. When a neighbor tells their neighbor how wonderful their healthcare plan is, instead of the government telling them how wonderful the healthcare plan they have to buy is, suddenly we're in a much better place for progress.
Great. Thank you very much. Edra?
Okay, so when I think about healthcare, and I think the question was, what would I do? I look at silos or verticals. So we've been talking up here about Medicare for all. And so first and foremost, that's about access to healthcare and healthcare being paid for. So I believe in a Medicare for all system or something like that. The point here is this: when you're in Congress, you look at plans and then you hold hearings and you do analysis. And that is ultimately a goal to get us to covering everyone. Now, I also look at care, which is our preventative care. So let's look at that as another vertical. All of us need preventive health care. We need to make sure that we're screened for preventive diseases. We need to make sure that there are primary care doctors. We need to make sure that we have access to mental health and to addiction recovery. Mental health must be part of our overarching healthcare system, not a secondary, not an aside. Dental care, vision care. We are whole people, and our healthcare system must treat us as such. I also look at New York 21 and I think about the opportunities to further education. We have a health professional shortage area in much of this region, which means we do not have enough doctors. We don't have enough nurse midwives. We don't have enough nurses or CNAs. We have the workforce. We have the opportunities to train them. We need to use those opportunities and invest. And when I'm talking about investment, another plan is to look at our infrastructure. We cannot do telemedicine here, which is sorely needed because we don't have the infrastructure. And so we need to invest in that. And last but not least, we need prescription drug reform. We need to hold prescription drug companies accountable for the opioid epidemic, and we need to make sure that everyone has access to the prescription drugs that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn, it's your turn.
So my degree is in clinical psychology. My area of expertise is group dynamics, but instead of doing family therapy or group therapy, I went into government agencies to fix the agency and deal with dysfunctional teams, and discovered it's a really big problem because our government departments and agencies are really dysfunctional and wasteful. I started doing strategic planning, bringing people together. In the beginning, it was to bring together 7 different agencies, all the stakeholders that are responsible for modernizing our airspace system. I took that strategic planning model into criminal justice reform, which is most of what I do in my private consulting practice. So when I hear this question, it's a great question, and the key word is roadmap. So as a strategic planner who's driven very complicated, multi-level solutions that are summarized in really plain language and impacted difficult problems with real results, measured results, you have to start with a vision. So if the vision is world-class healthcare for all, then you can start saying, well, what are the strategic goals? And then you get to the roadmap, which is what are you going to do immediately, short-term, mid-term, and long-term? So when I think about strategic goals regarding healthcare, it's increase access, decrease costs, build the partnerships that you need to deliver the goods, train people. There's a lot of need for organizational excellence training, and measure results. Part of the failure of our healthcare system is they measure paperwork and not health outcomes. Okay, so, and I'll finish this in my follow-up minute. Short-term, midterm, immediate short-term, midterm, and long-term actions. Immediate actions, I fully support the New York Medicare for All legislation. I wonder why Democrats didn't run someone against the one Republican Senate member who has been standing in the way of Medicare for All in New York. And I'll finish in my next minute.
Thank you, Lynn. Emily?
The way I see it, healthcare is a public good. And just like with education, if one person lacks it, then we all pay the price. And that is a moral and it's an economic truth. When I was the deputy director at ANCA, I was also in charge of finding our health plans every year. And so I saw firsthand the options, all the options to choose from. Premiums were going up and the quality of the plan were going down. And so I do support a Medicare for All program. And I support any combination of what Senator Gillibrand and all the others have put together. A graduated system where we pay into it, also covering mental illness, also covering nursing home care, dental, preventive medicine, and what we also need to be doing at the same time is making sure the quality of care rises. And the one example I'll give you is that we need to do more to decrease the maternal mortality rates in our country, which are the worst in the industrialized nations. But the question is about roadmap. And we can lay out very systematized ways of getting there, everyone getting a chance to buy in first. But the reality is we have to have the public will and the electoral will to get there. And I would imagine that everyone in this room shares the idea of some sort of Medicare for All system, something like that eventually. But the reality is there are a lot of other people outside this room who don't share that view. And so we need to have someone out there who is partnering with businesses, partnering with community organizations, and other groups to help spread this message. And in my 30-second follow-up, I will share with you a story that illustrates how I know firsthand that that is possible. The message is Medicare works. It's good for all of us. It costs less, and it gets us better care.
Thank you. So now it's time for the 1-minute rebuttal, additional comments, and we'll start again with you, Patrick.
Let's go
In the
again.
same order.
So I would disagree that this is a divisive or a polarizing issue. A majority of the American people are on board with a Medicare for All system. And if we have candidates and members of Congress that will be bold advocates, we will push what is just over 50% into a supermajority. I think it's a little bit naive to expect that the insurance companies are going to go along willingly. They fought tooth and nail in 2008 and 2009 to prevent the public option, and they'll do it again. Because a public option will outcompete any product that they can put forward, because Medicare is a 2% overhead and they have a 20% overhead, and they cannot compete. One of the ways in which they fight is through their corporate political action committees, including the $200,000 that Elise Stefanik has taken from healthcare PACs. So Dylan, you're right. We have a broken political system, and we can fix it. And the first step to fix it is electing candidates that refuse to take corporate PAC and lobbyist money. 4 out of the 6 of us on this stage have publicly said that we will not take corporate PAC and lobbyist money. Today, I'm asking you to help us make it 5.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Dylan.
Interestingly, I'm the only person standing here who has not taken corporate PAC or lobbyist money, Patrick, so it's odd to me that you brought that up. But I appreciate that you did so. Well, then talk to Pete DeMola, because I know you took some PAC money. Anyway, as I am the only person here who is both endorsed by unions, I'm also the only person here who hasn't taken the PAC money. I think Justice Democrats is a PAC. You should look up the definition. And I know they're funding it. Okay. Anyway, the Democratic Party has proven themselves beholden to the health insurance and drug companies. The political system has been completely corrupted at a level that you cannot comprehend. I spent years of my life in Washington, D.C. with our sitting politicians. You are kidding yourselves if you believe that simply sending somebody who believes what you believe will solve your problems. You need to send someone to Washington, D.C. with a history of actually standing up to our politicians for what is right. And my history will show that very clearly.
Thank you, Dylan. Katie?
These forums are always so entertaining, even as a candidate, because we agree on so much. And yet, at the end of the day, what this race is about is who can beat Elise Stefanik. That is the best thing we can do in order to challenge our current administration. So if you don't agree with our current administration, when you go into that voting booth, what your job is to imagine each and every one of us, not on a stage like this, but on a stage next to Elise Stefanik. Who is it? And Dylan has a good point. You know, he's been the angry guy on TV. He can tell it like it is. But who on the stage, when put next to Elise Stefanik, is not going to go blank, wilt, or not have a really good rebuttal? And who is it that is going to give not just the people in this room, but the hardworking people throughout this district who are not paying attention to this race because they're busy putting food on the table and getting to work on time? Who are they going to trust? Who are they going to have faith in? And who's going to give them a good reason to vote for someone new this time?
Thank you, Katie. Tedra?
So in the first part of the question, I talked about those verticals. I want you to know a little bit about me and my background. I did HIV and AIDS education for many years and then ran a community health coalition. And those kinds of skills I hope to bring to Congress. The reality is this district is very large. And I was appointed by the governor to serve on the New York State Healthcare Redesign Commission. And what we did was we looked at the healthcare delivery system in the North Country and how we were collaborating and delivering healthcare. That kind of work is the kind of work that I hope to bring to serve you. So, in other words, I would like to create a coalition throughout this district of healthcare providers, of human service providers, of business owners, of elected officials, working together to look at our healthcare delivery system, look at the gaps in those services, and then how do we solve the problem. And so those skills I have, I hope to bring to bear as a congressperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Tedra. Lynn, go ahead.
So I was talking about immediate, midterm, short-term, midterm, and long-term solutions and actions. When I do strategic planning, there's always like the part that says, well, here's our grand goal and our grand vision, and that's where we're going to get at some point, like world-class healthcare services for everyone starting in New York State. And then you have to have some really immediate actions because people are really hurting. Got my house up here 15 years ago. I came up here every summer as a child. It felt healthier decades ago. There's an enormous amount of poverty in this district. So we have to figure out what's going to help people right away, what's going to help in the long term. And you need someone like me who's going to ask the inconvenient questions. For example, you want to know about the quality of a nationally funded healthcare system? Ask a veteran. You want to know how bad nationally funded healthcare can be? Ask a Native American. There are serious problems. I listen to people, I talk with people. They're concerned about quality of care and the coordination of care in these massive legislation.
Thank you very much. Emily.
The public will is indeed something we're going to have to get behind or get beyond. Come June 27th, there will be the Republicans who start to say socialized medicine, just as they started to say during the general election. We will have a strong fight on our hands when we start promoting Medicare for all. Small business owners, we need to get them on board. And I have relationships with the small business community and am able to speak the way they need to be spoken with. And there are a lot of other people who just consider it socialized medicine, like the man in Argyle, when we were talking about expanding healthcare for everyone, who said, that's socialized medicine, I know it is. And bottom line, after a conversation, I said, what about the idea of everyone having a chance to buy into Medicare? Because if you work hard, you should earn that, he said, yes, that's a good idea. But that was not his initial understanding of it, and it wasn't until we sat down together that his mind got changed.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're going to go to our second in-depth question. What should our federal government do to provide our future generations with the academic and vocational educational opportunities that will help lead to rewarding and productive lives? You have 2 minutes to respond and 15 seconds left to speak when you see the yellow card, and we are going to start with Emily.
The number one thing that our federal government and our state government can do is to invest. Funding education is an investment in our future. It's the number one thing that we can do. And I know from having been a professor at Paul Smith College that when it comes to higher education, there are a lot of people in traditional four-year schools who would be happier if they were in a vocational program. And so I fully support, and we need to expand access to those. But I'd like to focus on pre-K through secondary education, because if that's not taken care of, nothing else is going to matter. In Congress, we need to be pushing back against the GOP, Betsy DeVos, and Trump's choosing to defund the Department of Education by a significant amount. They're doubling down on that right now in Congress for the next budget. I propose we focus on programs such as the Community School Program, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a program to help create partnerships between the school, the community, social services organizations, so that the schools can be a full-service place to meet students' needs, particularly low-income needs in an area like ours. That's going to cost money, and we have it. If we close just one of these tax loopholes, we'll have the money. There's the carried interest loophole that is basically allowing private investment fund managers to take capital gains payments on what is really their salary. And if we were to close that one, by all estimates, we would have between $10 and $12 million to invest in $1 billion, to invest in a program like this. That, to me, is worth it. So I'm advocating for investing in education.
Thank you, Emily. Lynn, you are next. Sorry, Patrick, excuse me, it's Lynn's turn. We're going in reverse order of what we did before.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Mixing it up here.
All right. So the question was about future generations. I think it also relates to current generations and all generations. So I believe in lifelong learning. I certainly believe that from pre-K through university, there should be free educational options for everybody. The whole idea, I also believe in learning a skill or a trade in high school, and if you missed it in high school, then afterwards. There are great best practices around the country. Iowa, for example, every community college in the state has a partnership with local high schools and local businesses to create certificate programs that lead to real jobs. So there are all kinds of best practices out there and all kinds of ways that we can solve this problem. I appreciate some of the tax loopholes and rip-offs that Emily has started talking about. There is an enormous amount of waste in government, enormous. My estimate was $1 trillion a year. It's programs that have no results. It's programs that buy stupid things. It's programs that buy important things in stupid ways. It's the unbelievably overblown budget of the US military. There are so many ways to cut waste and cut programs that have no results. There was an audit that said 24% of all federal programs have no results, nothing. So those are the programs that I would demand money get returned back to communities. Take the waste out of bureaucracies, invest those savings in our communities. Do not be fooled. There's tons of money out there, whether it's from tax loopholes or cutting waste. The money is there to invest in our communities. I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Tedra?
Okay, so like the first question, I'm going to answer this question similarly. When I think of education, I look at where we start. We need to start before school, and we need to fully fund Head Start. We know that children's outcomes when they start school earlier and when they have support, so fully funding Head Start and universal pre-K. The other thing I want to tie us to is thinking about children who have Head Start and universal pre-K, their parents are able to work. So when we're talking about lifting people out of poverty, it's not just about education, it's about access to jobs and being able to be in the workforce. So we need to make that connection. So we're looking at early childhood education. When I think about fully funding education, I look at the gutting of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which is being gutted now. So we need to make sure that all students, whether they're our best and brightest, or whether they're our best and have some struggles, the best is the word here. We need to equally fund every one of our students and make sure that they have access to education. And finally, I want to talk about how do we get high schoolers into the appropriate or try to figure out their career. And one of the ways to do that is to partner with businesses, to partner with all of the universities we have. My son hated college. He graduated a year early. Why? Because he went in with college credits. He was able to do that. So I want to make sure that we are partnering with our universities and bringing those opportunities into schools. Thank you. Oh, do I have 15 seconds? And last, I'm going to say, my mother went to college at 40. And on my next response, I'll talk about that.
Katie.
So education, of course, is a very complicated and vast issue, but because the question is about vocational training specifically, and because I truly believe that this is one of the most important issues we can address right now in our country, and especially in New York 21, I'm going to speak specifically to that. Right now, what we have is a mindset, and it was a noble goal, college for every student, but that one-size-fits-all model simply doesn't work. It's never worked. We're all very different, and in an economy, especially like ours, what we need to do is allow people to shine in the areas that they naturally shine in. And we need to start with that vocational training, bringing trades, bringing shop back into our high schools. Because that college path is just not going to work for everybody. It's not affordable. If we had a system in which it was and we could all afford and had the luxury of a wonderful liberal arts education, I am all for that. But it's not realistic right now. And we have some very good systems. We have CV Tech, we have BOCES. The problem is they need rebranding. They need to be refreshed. Because people, children, young people that grew up with me in our local schools looked at the kids who went to BOCES as other, as different, as some kind of special needs student. And that's just not the case. But marketing is where we solve that problem. And furthermore, we don't actually have a lack of jobs in New York 21. We may have a lack of jobs that are paying enough, but what we do have is a lack of qualified individuals to fill those positions. So when we start to partner with our vocational training programs, and when we start to make sure that students are coming out of their high schools with the skills they need to succeed in a nursing program, and the skills they need to succeed in some other kind of vocational training program, or the relationships that they need in order to find a good apprenticeship and take them down a path where they can actually earn money, then we start to have healthy communities that are moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Dylan?
Excuse me. So the world right now is going through what I call the third industrial revolution. We are at a moment in time where the rate of change is the highest it has ever been. We're at a moment in time where we are shifting from giant centralized fossil fuel-based systems that have gotten us where we are today, thanks to Dwight Eisenhower and an infrastructure bank that created the country we now live in. We've learned a tremendous amount about how education works and about how human beings learn. We know that human beings learn significantly more when they are enrolled in actually solving a problem. One of the reasons when I left MSNBC and started my business, Helical, what we did was we put these solar-powered hydroponic greenhouses inside of school systems because we knew that part of the shift away from giant centralized fossil fuel-based systems and into distributed grid systems that allow a resilient, adaptable environment is only possible if we are enrolling our students in their understanding and ability to help facilitate the transition that we are going through. As we move to a distributed renewable grid, as we move to a distributed farming network, as we move to an adaptable, resilient system, the only way that we get there is by understanding not only where we're going, but how we are going to teach the people in our lives how to do these things. It's not simply about understanding how to install a solar panel or how to operate a hydroponic system. It's about understanding how to deal with the calculations of science, technology, engineering, and math that are necessary at a time when the world is changing faster than ever. There is no barrier to doing any of this other than the decision to do it and to fund the teachers that make it happen and support the teachers' unions that support the teachers that make that happen.
Thank you. And Patrick?
Second try. One of the most important things that we have to deal with when we're reforming our education system, and we have to do this in partnership between the federal government and state and local governments, is we need to untie funding of public education from property taxes. Because right now, the communities with the nicest homes get the best schools. And instead of education being the great equalizer, it's perpetuating income and wealth inequality as those who are at the higher end of the economic ladder are able to obtain a better education. So we have to make that shift. We have to change the definition of higher education that deals with the rebranding that Katie was talking about. It's not just four-year college. It's two-year. It's trade schools. It's vocational training. It's apprenticeships. All of that. Anything that is post-secondary, we should be referring to as higher education. And with that said, throughout our history, on a number of occasions, we have extended the definition of what public education is. As the economy has demanded greater skill from workers, we went from 8th grade being public education to 12th grade. And now it is time to do that again. Some post-secondary education is becoming necessary in the modern economy. So we need to have higher education as a right. And that means tuition-free public schools and tuition-free two-year schools and funding tuition-free trade schools so that people can get the education they need without being saddled with $1.5 trillion of student debt that is holding back our economic growth and holding back the prospects of an entire generation. So we also have to deal with private schools. So having tuition-free public schools will put downward pressure on private schools, but we need to review the fact that education has gone up many multiples of inflation, and if schools can't justify the increased cost, they shouldn't be eligible for federal grants and federal loans. And by the way, we need more federal grants and less federal loans so that we can have higher education as a right. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And now it's time for a 1-minute rebuttal. And Emily, I'll start with you again.
Well, I agree in part with Mr. Nelson that the property tax model is doing regions like ours a disservice, given the direction of property values, the low-income nature. But I do still believe that as we find an alternative way to fund, that tie between our property values or our property taxes and our schools is a direct investment. It's a direct tie, and it indicates a commitment to our schools, which I think is really important to keep. And maybe we'll go all the way, but we need to make sure that there is that direct connection in some way, shape, or form so that we always feel a stake in our schools. And when it comes to the funding of higher education, I am a firm believer that there is a right place to learn for everyone. And that includes those traditional four-year private schools. It also includes the public four-year institutions and the vocational programs. And so as we work to we need to make sure that options for everyone remain open, raise the minimum limit on the federal Pell Grants and Stafford loans to middle-class individuals.
Thanks, Emily.
Is it me?
Go ahead, Lynn.
So I'm going to bring out three things that are important when you're trying to drive solutions to complex problems, like transforming our education system, or transitioning to a green economy, or dealing with war and peace building in the 21st century. And that's that, as Tedra actually described, all of our departments and agencies, all government agencies exist in silos. When we did the transformation of the New York City Department of Probation, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, what we learned is that you have to be very explicit about creating those cross-agency, cross-partner structures that allow, for example, citizen input into public policy. So there are ways to put structures in place that make sure that all these partnerships that we're all talking about are communicating with each other, coordinating actions, coordinating budgets, which is really hard, and coordinating the measures for what the results are that we're seeking.
Thank you very much. Tedra?
Okay, 2 stories. I have a group of teenagers who are helping me, and Kelsey, I met her on Friday. She is finishing high school with a CNA. She's going to Adirondack Community College to get her RN, and she has a plan to go to Plattsburgh to get her BSN. That's exactly what we want, because we want her to stay here. And what we want the federal government to do is to give her loan repayment when she gets a job in the North Country or in Northern New York through the Health Services Administration. That's what we want. It's a wonderful plan. I also want to say this. My mother went to school at 40. I have 9 adopted siblings. 5 of us were in college at the same time. Thank you, Ronald Reagan, for cutting all of that federal funding. Here we are. I would not have gone to college if we had not had federal loans. We need to make sure that we've got federal loans in the Perkins grants, and we also need to cap loans at 2% and make sure that they're subsidized so that students aren't incurring interest while they're in school. Those are 2 things we need to ensure. The federal government should not be making money off of students going to university.
Thank you, Tedra. Katie?
Couldn't agree more, Tedra. We have a for-profit education system, as we have a for-profit healthcare system, a for-profit prison system, and so many other for-profit systems that we see failing us left, right, and center. I don't have a rebuttal of any kind here, but what I would like to point out is that at Clinton Community College, they are training wind turbine technicians. It is the fastest growing job sector, and we could power the Eastern Seaboard with offshore wind if we were selling it to them instead of the oil companies. So this vocational training issue fits into an infrastructure investment plan and a future and an economic vibrancy that is exactly what we need looking forward. These issues, we can talk about healthcare, we can talk about education, but at the end of the day, these issues are all interconnected. And there is no silver bullet answer. What we need to do is communicate more fully about them. We need Clinton community to be in touch with NCCC. We need all of our private schools and our public schools to be communicating so that we can create a plan that leads us into the future.
Thank you, Katie. Dylan?
So the profits from our for-profit educational systems are used to finance politicians to ensure policies that basically come at the expense of teachers and students. It's yet another fantastic example of how broken our political system is. Basically, if you look at any major sector of our lives or our economy, whether it's teachers and students, doctors and patients go down the line, the human beings tend to be the lowest possible priority, and the profits of the institutions that sit on top of it tend to be the highest priority. I can think, once again, of no greater evidence of how broken our political system is. There is absolutely no shortage of solutions to every single problem that we have. There is, however, an inability for the country to come together to necessarily reform the way that we elect our politicians, to reconnect voters to our government in a way that ensures that those solutions actually become part of our political process. That's something that I've studied over the past 10 years, and it's really the primary reason why I've put myself out there as an option to represent us in Congress.
Thank you, Dylan. Patrick?
So I'd like to talk a little bit more about the outstanding student debt in this country, considering $150,000 of it is mine. So we need to go beyond a 2% cap. We should be tying the interest rate on student loans to the discount window at the Federal Reserve The rate that the big banks can borrow at should be the rate at which we invest in our students. Going beyond that, we need to be talking about more than just interest, but we need to be talking about principal forgiveness, because these massive balances that may never be paid off are holding back the American economy. It's houses not being purchased, it's cars not being purchased, it's families being delayed or not being started at all, it's weddings that don't happen because of a generation saddled in student debt based upon bad education policy made by the generation before it. A study came out from the Sanders Institute that said that instead of using $1.5 trillion to give a massive giveaway to the wealthy and powerful, if we had used that to forgive student loans, we actually would have grown the American economy about 1.5% faster than was projected under the tax cut, or rather the tax scam.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we are going to begin our lightning round of questions with 30 seconds for each candidate to respond. Candidates, you will have 10 seconds left to speak when you see the yellow paddle. So, and we will start in alphabetical order and kind of go cascade through that alphabetical order. So you'll get it when I get going. So just a second, I'll ask the question, then you can stand up. Start with Tedra the first time, and then Lynn, and then we'll start with Emily on the next question, and so on. Okay. If elected, what would you do to spur economic development and jobs within our district? And Tedra, you can start.
I'm sorry?
Sure. If elected, what would you do to spur economic development and jobs within our district?
Okay, so we've talked about healthcare and education. I think that, we need to invest in healthcare and education. So we're going to put that to the side. The thing we haven't talked about is infrastructure. I drive now all the time through this region. I cannot work through the Adirondack Park. I cannot work even outside of Canton. I am 6 miles from the village of Canton, and my campaign manager cannot use his cell phone. We need to invest in infrastructure. I know that the governor says the last mile is coming. I was a legislator and I ended in 2010. The last mile has still not been built out, and they said it would happen then.
Lynn, go ahead.
So again, immediate solutions and long-term solutions. It's easy to push for and demand the kind of partnerships, especially in this state, which has a lot of money, and finding the federal grants that could add to that. It's easy to put together a partnership that would create, in the midterm and long term, the kinds of infrastructure and green energy transition jobs that we need. We need to figure out how to help people that are hungry tomorrow. What are we going to do, tomorrow morning that's going to make for more jobs? And I'll answer it the next time around.
Definitely infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. But I also know from my work that a little bit of seed money in the form of a grant from the federal government goes so far in our district. The Apex Solar that I mentioned, that was state, works the same way. That we had community members saying, I want solar. We had the solar distributors struggling. There was a mismatch. We took a little bit of seed money from the state, put together the program, and there's where you got those 30 jobs, quality increased to 130 within 5 years.
Patrick, go ahead.
Let's build a student debt forgiveness program for entrepreneurs in rural areas, and then let's reverse a technological trend in that we roll out 5G and gigabit internet in rural areas before it gets to urban areas to give rural communities like the 21st a competitive infrastructure advantage. And I believe I can build a coalition with urban representatives because they need to have something to entice people to leave the cities and move out to the country because the rent in New York City, as we all heard, is too damn high. So let's provide incentives for people to start businesses here, and let's give them the infrastructure they need to do it.
Thank you. Dylan.
So politicians say a lot of things. They never measure anything. They're never held accountable. The first step would be to create a dashboard of key performance indicators that you can actually measure your representatives against. What's your revenue per cow, your revenue per apple, your revenue per hotel room, your revenue per square foot of commercial real estate. And to that end, I've already begun the process of reaching out to both one of the largest restaurant chains in Canada to do a cheese deal with our dairy farmers, as well as addressing the wireless issue with the board of directors at Google in a recent phone call and set of meetings. Those are the sorts of things that I would continue to do.
Thank you. Katie?
Cell phone coverage and broadband coverage. Healthcare, everyone needs it. Everyone needs to be able to afford it. Vocational training investment. Making sure that we invest in a civilian conservation corps types job program that takes into account clean energy and rolls out the kind of infrastructure investment that can actually take us into the 21st century. We need to make sure that we also have access to our basic needs. You know, it's transportation, it's childcare. Those are the things that my generation is lacking and is keeping us from investing here and staying here in this community.
Thank you. It's time for the next question, and Lynn, it'll be your turn to start. What measures would you propose to try to eliminate future acts of gun violence in our nation's schools?
Okay, so the easy answer is ban all guns, but I don't believe in that. I'm a psychologist. I think we have to look deeper. We have to look at the root causes of violence. We have to look at domestic violence, which I think creates some really angry people. I think we have to stop excusing domestic violence and dismissing it as a misdemeanor and call it a felony. We need to look at the medication crisis that is creating young people who are angry and hallucinating. And I'll talk more the next chance I get.
Emily?
It is easy to say mental illness, and certainly that's a component for some people, but to go down that route too far is to bring us into the danger of anyone with a mental illness being unable to own a gun. The young man in Texas showed no signs. Like everyone up here, I think it would be very sensible to have universal background checks at the federal level. And I honestly don't believe, and I know most gun owners don't believe either, that the military-style weapons really need to be any place but other than in the military.
So, there are the easy solutions that can help reduce the problem. Universal background checks, banning bomb stocks, no fly, no buy. And yes, I'm in favor of reinstating the federal assault weapons ban, which isn't quite super popular yet, but I think with advocacy it can get there. It was an effective policy. But beyond the gun control issue, we need universal health care that includes mental health, but we also need to have a conversation, and this gets to a First Amendment issue, but we need to have a conversation with our friends in the media about how they cover these instances and ensure that we're not glorifying violence and giving people a chance for a grand last stand where they'll be remembered. I shouldn't know Adam Lanza's name.
I suspect there'll be mutual agreement up and down the table, all the obvious solutions that are the low-hanging fruit. It's an embarrassment that we haven't done any of them already. I do agree with Patrick that reconsideration, a significant reconsideration, or at least the building of the necessary political momentum by supporting the students in this country to reinstate the assault weapons ban is very much in order. And at the same time, the ability to actually create pathways for young men that give them pride and purpose as an alternative to the frustration that then gets yielded into this violence is something else to consider.
Thank you.
So we do have a culture of violence, and we also have extreme poverty, and they are not mutually exclusive. We have an environment in which children are living in isolation from their parents, from their classmates, from access to health care. And so we really have to look at this culturally right now. There is no silver bullet. I can stand up here and say what a lot of you want to hear, but it's not going to be the one thing that solves the problem. We need universal background checks. The fact that Stefanik co-sponsored the concealed carry reciprocity makes me want to cry. I mean, women move across state lines to be safe. And so that's one thing that I would work immediately to overturn.
Do you mind repeating that question?
Not at all. What measures would you propose to try to eliminate future acts of gun violence in our nation's schools?
Okay, so let's start out with schools. We are talking about arming guards and arming teachers. What I propose is that we have school counselors. We don't care about, this country. We are not investing in counselors in schools. Our schools are our hubs for mental health and food. How many of you have backpack programs in your schools so that kids can eat? We need programs that are addressing trauma, like Bridges Out of Poverty. Now, the what is on my website. We got like 2 seconds. So I want to say there's a whole lot to read, but we need to start making sure that our schools, 30 seconds is very hard. You can't, this is an important, this is important. And I'm sorry, but 30 seconds is hardly enough time to even address it. It's almost disrespectful. I'm sorry, but this is important.
You're right, it is. All these topics are important. Okay, for the next question, Emily will be starting. In the context of the problem of big money in politics and the Citizens United decision, where do your campaign funds come from?
Long and the short of it is that my campaign funds come from people and entities that share my values, and that's the way it will always be. The reality is, for this race, up against someone who can easily raise a few $1,000,000, I will accept money from PACs, as long as they share my values. Once I'm there, you better believe that I will be pushing for some sort of a public finance option for our elections, because it's the people's voice that should be heard, not the voices of the most wealthy.
First and foremost, they don't come from any corporate PACs or any lobbyists, and that's why I did receive the endorsement of the Justice Democrats, which is a PAC designed to support people that don't take money from corporate PACs or lobbyists. That is the mission of the organization, because we believe that you cannot reform the campaign finance system by electing people that benefit from a corrupt campaign finance system. We have to fix this in the campaign first, and then send people to Washington that aren't beholden to special interests. We do need to overturn Citizens United, but in the space of time that we have, we need to create the strongest system of public campaign finance in the world so that nobody has to go begging to the wealthy and powerful for campaign funds.
In 2011, I founded a group called Get Money Out. Its entire purpose is to reform campaign finance. I donated that list to a group called Represent.us. They have continued to this day to reform campaign finance. I also am the co-founder of a group called Business for Democracy. It is a business coalition that works to end to reform campaign finance. The only PAC that I'm having a conversation with is a PAC called End Citizens United, and I've been interviewing them to see whether I can take their money without being attacked by Patrick.
Yes.
Well, guys, I'm going to one-up both of you because the founder of End Citizens United donated personally to my campaign, so I'll be taking that endorsement. But the way that we fix this, his name's Jordan Wood, don't worry. So the way we fix this problem, which is really the important thing, is that we put a cap on how much you can raise per run by level of office. So say you could only raise $500,000 for a congressional race, even if it was just $1 million. What that does is it eliminates the advantage that the incumbent has with their war chest. And it levels the playing field, and it gets to the root of so many of these problems that are underlying everything else we're talking about on the world stage right now.
Okay, I went over last time. Your question is, where does my money come from? And the answer is you. The money that I have raised is from people in this district. And so that's a short answer. I will say the Milton Democratic Committee gave me $50, and a colleague who was a former legislator with me, who is no longer a legislator, gave me the rest of his money. And so I got $450 from the committee to elect Charlie House. That's it. You and those.
Thank you.
The Green Party accepts no political PAC money, no lobbyist money, and no contributions greater than, I think the limit is $2,700, and I abide by that value system. You all are going to have a difficult decision to make on Election Day. From where I sit and stand, the Democrats and the Republicans are each paid for by lobbyists of some kind of industry. And in general, those industries benefit from war. And that's why we are marching towards a war crisis in this country. Vote green.
Okay, our next question. We'll be starting with Patrick for this one. The Trump administration has proposed many policy changes that could greatly affect our environment. Which of these changes most concerns you?
Just want to add that our average contribution is only $32. It's hard to say. I think appointing Scott Pruitt as head of the EPA, who is somebody that rather than listen to scientists, has you, the taxpayers, fund a soundproof booth so that he doesn't have to listen to criticism from anybody. That's really disturbing, that we're appointing people that won't listen to scientists at all to very important positions to protect our environment. I think signing House Joint Resolution 38 was incredibly disturbing, that allowed coal companies to dump their debris in the streams and the rivers of the United States at a time when we're trying to fix our water systems.
Dylan, go ahead.
The elimination of measurement and data is the most concerning to me. If you don't know what's happening, you cannot deal with it. That, and I suppose the decision to remove our country from the Paris Climate Accord, which diminishes our position as a global leader on an issue that we should be leading. Again, we are in the middle of a third industrial revolution. Our country is the country that can lead the world in the transition to a global, adaptable, renewable grid. This president is going in the exact opposite direction, both in terms of our relationship with the world and our relationship with science.
Yeah, I really don't have a lot to add to that one. So what I will talk about in the 20 seconds remaining is the leadership that I've already shown on environmental issues. I organized and led a divestment campaign post Standing Rock, a very successful campaign that was worldwide. I also led the charge to get the rail cars out of the Adirondack Park. And what I hope that that proves to you is that I'm not waiting to get elected to be effective and to advocate. I'm not going to sit here and talk about what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and do it. And that's why I'm here to earn your trust tonight, because I'm here to fight for this region, for all the people in it, and for the future that our children deserve.
So what am I concerned about? The president purged and buried scientific data from federal climate websites, approved permits for Keystone Pipeline, executive order to review waters of the U.S. rule, which reduced wetland protection, rescinded prohibitions on lead, ammunition on federal lands and waters, withdrew tracking of methane emission leaks, budget requests had deep cuts for science and environmental agencies, 31% cut for the EPA. Shall I go on?
Lynn?
So I agree with everything Tedra said. I mean, that's a great list, and she's got it knocked. My biggest concern is this anti-truth, anti-science epidemic that's going through all of our government agencies. And it is an infection. This is a great country western song. We Were Us, right? Every word, every time, every line, every instance. It's in every sentence. The infection, the anti-truth, the anti-science infection in government agencies, it's in every sentence of every policy.
Emily?
Between now and November 7th, the person's track record who I care most about is Elise Stefanik's. And it's funny that she votes 96% like Donald Trump, so the list is similar. The stream dumping rule, the rollback of EPA regulations, the fewer funds going towards clean energy infrastructure and more towards the fossil fuel industry. And finally, that she did not say a word about the Paris Accord until he pulled out. And only then did she say, you shouldn't have done it. That's followership. That's not leadership.
On our next question, Dylan, you'll go first. If elected, what would you advocate for to help local communities deal with their crumbling infrastructure?
So I've been advocating for a national infrastructure bank over the course of the past 10 years. It is possible to reclassify up to $3 or $4 trillion of what's on the balance sheet at the Federal Reserve and currently held as U.S. Treasuries as preferred stock. It would function exactly as a Treasury bond would function, backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. However, instead of funding the balance sheet of the large banks, it would fund the balance sheet of a large infrastructure bank, which would then be able to lend and invest into our district in a way that will take us to through the third industrial revolution I've been talking about, a la Mr. Eisenhower so long ago.
Katie?
I think that sounds like a great idea. I also think, as I said before, a civilian conservation corps types jobs program that invests directly in our infrastructure in a clean way, it's forward-looking, And also, we need to stop trying to incentivize companies like Verizon to come up here and finally finish the job, and we need to penalize them when they don't, because there is not enough of an ROI for them, and they're not going to do it. We need to be strong, we need to stand up, we need real leadership, and we need to tell the companies that it's time for the little guy to actually succeed, and we're not going to be run by big corporations any longer.
Thank you. Tedra?
I think the important thing is we just passed a tax plan that put us further in debt, $1.5 trillion. The reality is when people get elected, there's people we say they will never undo a tax plan. And the answer to that is I will undo that tax plan. And that debt, that money that we've taken from given to corporations needs to be given to us and to our infrastructure. We need to restructure what we've been doing wrong and giving it to corporations, and we need it here.
Well, there are a lot of great ideas. I agree with a lot of them. Infrastructure bank, getting the money out, redirecting it. The piece that I want to add is the importance of local citizen input to all these decisions about economic development and job development. It's really important that you all are part of the conversation, that the people that go into government understand that it has to be a conversation. It has to be customized for what works in Saranac Lake, where you have all kinds of great schools and a great hospital system, isn't going to work in my town of Schroon Lake. So customize, listen to citizen input.
Right now, there is in the House and the Senate 2 proposals by the Democratic Party members that would help do exactly this. There are 5 particular parts of the tax code that they have said if we change this, if we either close this loophole or change it back to the way it was, particularly with the corporate tax rates, then we will have $1 trillion to fund some very specific infrastructure planning, including helping with school rebuilding. I support those plans.
Here's one of the reasons why you want to vote for a wonk. Medicare for all. And I'll tell you why. In upstate New York and in the North Country, upwards of 3/4 to 80% of local property taxes are going to health care through the county apportionment of Medicaid and through municipal employee health care. It's 75, 80% of your property taxes that should be being spent on sewer systems and water systems and your roads and bridges that are going into health care. So if we pass Medicare for all, a national health insurance program, we will free up local property taxes to invest in infrastructure and also cut some of the highest in the country property taxes here in New York.
Thank you. For our next question, and Katie, you'll be starting. How would you respond to the proposed domestic gag rule to ban Title X family planning providers from referring women to abortion providers?
I mean, the fact that we're still having a conversation about whether or not the government should interfere in the way women take care of themselves is beyond me. We are watching ourselves go backwards right now. And what we need is more information, more access, and to be having a real and honest conversation about all of the options available and what's really going on. I mean, I look at my daughter and I think, if no one's willing to have an honest conversation with her about what could happen given the choices she might make, then how is she ever supposed to make an informed decision? It's a much longer conversation, but very opposed.
Pedro?
Can you repeat that one? I want to make
Sure.
sure I answer it.
How would you respond to the proposed domestic gag rule to ban Title X family planning providers from referring women to abortion providers?
And my response is to win. Look at Elise Stefanik's record. We must win the House. We must win the Senate. And we must eventually win the presidency. This chipping away at our health care rights, at women's rights. The reality is this. We all need access to health care. Women, we need it. And Elise Stefanik is the barrier in this district, and we must win this seat.
I expect that somebody at this table will win this seat. I'm the one that's always asking the inconvenient questions. So, of course, I think that rule is horrible, and it's being expanded into international policy, too. So it's true here and it's true around the world. Where were the Democrats when the Republicans started putting in place a deep bench of justices and judges that don't understand and don't want to listen to women? We're in trouble for a long time because the wrong people are being put into the court system.
I would tell Elise Stefanik the story of a good friend of mine who back in the 1950s, a good friend of hers bled out from an illegal abortion. My guess is that's not going to touch her. She says she's pro-life, but the reality is she's not your life, nor the pro-life of a struggling mother. She's her pro-life. And we need someone who is pro the life of all of us and understands that a woman, and only a woman, controls her body.
I think it just goes to show how the lack of confidence that the Republican Party has in their own arguments on this issue. If you have confidence in your arguments, you don't pass laws preventing people from providing more information. You make your argument. So if you have to resort to gag rules, it means you're already admitting that you've lost the issue, and they have, and it's time to elect a Congress that will protect a woman's right to choose.
Not only do we need to defend a woman's right to choose, we need to move the conversation forward to enhance available funding for women's health care, women's education, women's small business, by pushing the conversation back to force the idea of trying to defend this line. It prevents us from moving the issue forward to women's equal pay and every other issue that still needs to be resolved. Of course, this is a bad idea, but consuming our time and energy having that conversation prevents us from advancing full equality for all people in the society.
Okay, our next question. American college graduates are drowning in college loan debt. If elected, what actions would you propose to correct this situation? And we're starting with Tedra.
Well, I think I started it before. Capping a 2% cap on student loans, reinvestment in health service corps so that people can have loan repayment, and also public health service corps so that teachers can have loan repayment. Let me see. I'm thinking of all the things. 30 seconds isn't enough time. The other thing, well, I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks.
So I had a child at age 42. He's 29, do the math. And he has college debt. So the proposals that I have written about and talked about are immediate, short-term, midterm, and long-term. So immediate, why is the federal government making any interest profit at all on student loans? So cut the interest rate to 0.01. That's the first thing. So the government isn't making money off of student debt. Student loans have been packaged and repackaged. We don't even know who owns them anymore. So we have to figure out tax incentives to help our students deal with debt.
The biggest demographic in our country that's being affected is the middle class, because we have the federally subsidized loans, but the income that they're making is too high. So we need to lower the limits so that they too can access these. Plus, the size of the loans need to be different, the size that you can apply for. You shouldn't come out of college with debts that charge more interest than your auto or your first home. As for low repayment, in very specific situations, like someone relocating to a low-income area, we just have to be careful, because if one person doesn't repay the loan, other people are going to have to pick up the debt.
So I've addressed this a couple different ways. I'll add one more point. Let's bring back dischargeability of student debt. Why is it that this is the only form of debt that you can't discharge in bankruptcy, and yet it has exceedingly high interest rates? The interest rate is supposed to be commensurate with the risk, but there's no risk. And let's think about this from a global competitiveness standpoint. We have countries in the world that have tuition-free higher education. Some of them provide stipends to their students to go to school. Our country punishes students with student debt. Play these models forward 20 years, who is going to have the best educated and competitive workforce in a globalized economy? We need to change our policy so it can be us.
We literally have a broken political system. We have a political system that compromises the future of our country for the privilege of allowing bankers to assign interest payments to people like Patrick and so many others, when our future is dedicated and is in the hands of whether those people are able to have the liberty to shift and move around. That yet another classic example of how broken our political system is. Obviously, any sort of work for forgiveness for jobs that we would need to get taken care of, and a 30% cap on principal would be an obvious first solution.
I agree with so much of what everybody said, and this is the choice that you all have before you, that we're going to agree on a lot of these things, and at the end of the day, I'll just say it again, and I won't stop saying it, we have to choose the person in this primary who can actually go up against Elise Stefanik and optically appeal to all the people across New York 21 who are not paying attention, who don't have time to come and sit in this forum, who have no idea that there are 5 people running for Congress or that any of our names start with a K or a D or an M, and make sure that on June 26th, and more so on November 7th, people have a real choice. People have someone that they can trust in, that they can vote for, who gives them a real option, a real representative, someone to take them into the future.
Thank you. We're going to do 2 more questions and then have closing statements. So the next question starts with Lynn. What do you see as the biggest contributor to the opiate addiction crisis in the 21st district?
My degree's in clinical psychology. I've had this conversation with lots and lots of people in District 21. So there's poverty, which drives really bad decisions. There are school systems that are not serving the full intellectual and emotional and social needs of our students. There is an epidemic of domestic violence. There are doctors and clinics that are and including Veterans Affairs hospitals, VA hospitals, that are overprescribing medications. The solution has a lot of pieces to it.
I don't know what all of the causes are, but I do know that there are solutions, and some of them are contained right here within our town of Saranac Lake, such as the St. Joseph's Treatment and Addiction Center. I got to sit down with them last week, and they asked me, as a politician, to carry messages. The biggest among them is that we need to stop treating drug addiction like criminal justice and make it a healthcare issue. We need to put the spotlight on recovery.
So it's social isolation, it's the lack of economic opportunity, and it is indeed, as Emily said, took the words out of my mouth, the social stigma that is created when we take a class of healthcare patients and label them a criminal. They internalize that label, and it makes the road to recovery harder and longer. It's time to end the war on drugs and move those resources into treatment. Thank you.
So when Russia invaded Afghanistan in the 1970s, the immediate consequence was this country was overridden with heroin. America invaded Afghanistan about 17 years ago, and now our country's overridden with heroin. You combine that with a broken political system that empowers pharmaceutical companies to sell pain medicine that is basically high-grade heroin, you end up with a huge problem. There are 1,000 solutions that can be discussed, but they're awfully difficult to deal with. The one thing that I would really put out there is a legalization of marijuana as a way to allow people to migrate away from that addiction to something that at the very least is less life-threatening.
So there are these larger political issues at play. Of course, there are pharmaceutical companies preying on their market. However, the most direct correlation is poverty with opioid abuse. And this is where we, again, need to come to a more holistic approach and start meeting people's basic needs with healthcare, with jobs, with transportation, with an education, with the things that lift our communities up and give us hope in the future, give us a reason to wake up each day and look forward to something instead of turning to a drug to get by.
So we've talked about poverty, and it's about poverty, it's about lack of access to health care, it's about lack of access to mental health services. All of those things have contributed to the problem. And we've talked about prescription drug companies. Prescription drug companies should not be allowed to peddle their product from doctors to doctor to doctor. They should not be making money the way they are off of all of us. So we need to hold them accountable, and we need to sue them, just like we did with the tobacco industry. We need to hold them accountable and get health care for all of us.
Thank you. One more question, and we'll be starting with Emily. Our immigration system is clearly broken and in need of comprehensive reform. What changes to the system would you advocate for in relation to the 21st District?
Well, we need to be talking about the immigration in that mindset of people are coming here to work because they want to better themselves and they want to better their families. This still is the land of opportunity for many people. And the number one change that we need to make for our district is to have a year-long visa program for dairy workers, because there is just no visa program for immigrant dairy workers. And we need that. It won't solve all of the problems of the dairy industry, which we know is in dire straits right now, but it will help.
We need to pass DACA and stop using it as a political football. We're dealing with 800,000 people that are Americans in every way except on paper, and those of us that want to be in the lawmaking business are empowered to fix the on-paper part. And we also need to make it easier for working people to come to this country. When my most recent American ancestor came to this country in the turn of the 20th century, he came at a time when coming legally meant showing up at Ellis Island and not having syphilis. Now, it's a mound of paperwork, and you have to hire an American election lawyer to come here legally. I'm a working class person. I couldn't afford to come to this country legally and the money that I make every year. We need to make it easier and more accessible for people that want to do it the right way.
The absurdity of this conversation is that the entire agriculture, construction, and hospitality industry from coast to coast has been benefiting from a massive labor subsidy for decades. I find it comical when I hear President Trump talk about this issue, as he himself, I'm sure, has benefited in the millions by employing illegal workers inside of his hospitality empire. The obvious solution is either to triple the price of every Apple hotel room and building that we build, or legalize the actual people that are doing these jobs with guest worker programs and a path to citizenship.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely extending the visa and the guest worker part of this conversation, but ultimately, this is not that divisive of an issue up here. When I talk to the farmers, some of the big, very Republican dairy farms around here, they've invested time, money, training, and an emotional connection in their employees. And they want those people to be able to stay here, not have to send them back after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever we might extend it to, and then have to start all over again. So we have common ground here, and we need to definitely pursue a path to citizenship for all.
So we have in front of us now a 3 to 5 year worker visa for dairy farmers. We need to pass that. We need to make sure that seasonal workers visas are processed in a timely manner. Most apply in January, and they don't hear by September, so they've missed the season, pushing them to come to this country illegally. We need to expand tourism opportunities for work and make sure that visas are processed. Medical people who want to come here and serve in our communities, again, it's a visa process. We need to do that. And finally, DACA and temporary protected status. We need to give people a path to citizenship who have been living in this country and paying taxes and participating in this country.
I agree with a lot of what's been said. So what I want to add to the conversation is how important it is to have face-to-face, small group conversations with people that you do not agree with. So whether we're talking about immigration or climate change or mass incarceration, or all the reasons that we're going to war and shouldn't be going to any more wars. Why are we sending our men and women, sisters and brothers, children off to wars that do not have to be fight? Whatever the conversation is, we have to talk with people who do not agree with us.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for closing statements. Remember, you have 30 seconds to speak, 10 seconds left when you see the yellow. On a minute? Well, should we give them a minute? All right. All right, we'll give you a minute. And we rolled the die for this one, and it started out with 1, so that means Tedra starts. You're on the spot.
I'm on the spot. I want to say thank you again for allowing me to be here. You can see I'm not a fan of 30-second questions because we need to think about communicating with each other. Communication takes time. Lynn said it right. We need to listen to each other. What we haven't been able to talk about today is you. What a congressperson can do, the power of a congressperson, is constituent services, is getting a call from you and answering that call. I've been a legislator, I've worked in my community, and I've helped people in my community communicate, or help them go to my assembly, our state senators and our federal senators, because you matter. Constituent services, what we don't have right now in Elise Stefanik is someone who is listening to us and working with us. We need someone who lives where we live, who understands our needs and challenges, and who will passionately fight for us. And I'm hoping that you will vote for me on June 26th. Thank you.
So I'm not promising to bring tons of youthful energy. I am promising to bring to this position as your Congresswoman maturity, wisdom, and decades of experience delivering real results. I was in the White House Partnership to Reinvent Government for 6.5 years. I've seen best practices all over the country. I worked behind the scenes to be the strategic planning consultant for the transformation of criminal justice in New York City, which is the safest big city in America and the least incarcerated. Crime's going down, and so is incarceration, and so is time spent on probation and parole. I've done that work behind the scenes. I've done other kinds of really dramatic change work behind the scenes. You have to figure out who's got the laundry list and whose ego is going to get in the way of meeting with people to deliver agreed upon plans and roadmaps to drive solutions to complex problems. I have the humility. I don't have to prove anything. I have the wisdom. You want to send a message? Vote green. Make a historic decision to send the first green Congresswoman to the United States House of Representatives.
Together, we can win, and together, we will win with a message of optimism and compassion, because people are tired of hate. Several people have told me, suggested that I am too nice to run against Elise Stefanik, and I take that as a badge of honor. The newly elected town supervisor in Johnsburg told me the day after her election, I guess niceness does win. And with a candidate who has been doing what Elise Stefanik should have been doing all along, which is creating jobs, family-sustaining jobs, we too can win. There is a reason people are leaving the area. We need more opportunities. So together with my values of economic justice, my track record of creating opportunities, I will go to Washington to create partnerships to bring us the resources that we need so that together we can all grow and together we can all prosper. My name is Emily Martz, and I ask for your vote on June 26th.
Okay. My friends, thank you for being here and participating in the democratic process. I've been an organizer and an activist in this district going back almost 4 years now, and one of the things I find disheartening is that people have been taught to expect less from what it is we can accomplish together. It was more than 50 years ago, we built the interstate highway system, the largest infrastructure project in the country's history. More than 50 years ago, we guaranteed health care to all of our seniors as a right. More than 50 years ago, a president of the United States stood on a field at Rice University and declared that we would go to the moon. And we did. I ask of you to broaden your expectations and broaden your vision of what it is that it is possible that we can accomplish together. Because we can. We can live longer, we can live healthier lives, we can grow an economy in this region that dwarfs anything that we have ever seen in the past if we but set down our blinders and expect more and expect better from those that we elect to serve us. My name is Patrick Nelson, and I humbly ask for your support on June 26th for the House of Representatives. Thank you.
So I graduated from this high school in 1990. I don't remember an auditorium this nice at that time. I was raised in this town by a single mother. And that woman taught me that if I could dream it, I could have it. She encouraged me to follow my dreams. And I did, and many of them came true. And when I found myself at 35 years old hosting what at the time was the most widely watched financial program in the country, and I saw the corruption in our financial system that was destroying the opportunities for children like myself from this town coming to this high school, I made the decision to abandon the security of the position that I had achieved for myself in order to begin taking action to fight for other children like myself from this town in this high school. I've spent the past decade taking those actions, whether it's creating political organizations, establishing farming systems, or actually going directly to the halls of Congress and taking the fight to them. I believe that is the reason why I am the only person on this stage who has been backed and endorsed by the unions, because they know that I'm a man of action. There's lots of other people who have gone plenty long. I'm sorry. Okay. My apologies. I'm sorry. I was also disobedient.
We have two very disobedient candidates up here. Is everyone keeping track of that? Well, it's funny that Emily's told she's too nice, because what I get all the time is, you're too intense. You're too angry. What are you so upset about? You should smile more. Well, you know what? Why can't you get up there and be like Tedra and Emily and smile more and be peppier and tell people what they want to hear? Well, you know what? I am upset and I am angry because I see children who go home on the weekends with nothing to eat unless it's slipped into their backpack at school. I choose almost every fall between snow tires and school supplies, and I am not alone. My story is not unique, but it would be incredibly unique in Congress. And that is what this moment is about. This moment is about equal representation. This moment is about electing someone who has the experience to stand up for the people who are disenfranchised and voiceless and angry, and they're not voting because they don't believe that anything can be done anymore. It's time to give those people hope. It's time to give our future generations hope. It's time to send someone to DC who can actually represent New York 21.
Thank you. Thank you very much, candidates.